Okay, here's a question to ex-Mormons. Ex-Mormons in a specific subcategory of ex-Mormons. Alright, now here's the question. Most people who are ex-Mormon or have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have run into, I would say not all, I would say most people who have left the Church have run into the sheer onslaught of voluminous information concerning the origins of the Church. Okay, now, my question is this. As it turns out, it seems that a large portion of these ex-Mormons have left the Church and become active in yet another form of Christianity. Whether it's, the neighborhood Methodist or Baptist or whatever, right? And now, here's what I don't understand about this. This seems illogical to me. This seems like it almost seems like they're clinging to something, based on well, Mormonism is based on Christianity. It's based on the idea that Jesus is the Christ, and that his atonement has assumed some sort of form where it can actually, dissolve the sins of other people and allow them to get into heaven. And so it is a Christian religion. It is a cult as well, and that's not just me, making a statement or trying to attack the Church. It is categorically a cult. It's got, let's put it this way. In a list of 15 main attributes of a cult, of what a general cult is, the LDS Church fully and eloquently fits 14 of them. So that's not something to be argued. In fact, there's several religions that are cults, and even several Christian religions that are cults and display cult properties. Okay, so yeah, it seems that that because Christianity is the base of the LDS religion, that once they find out the LDS religion has so many flaws or so many historical inconsistencies and just problems with it in general, I believe once somebody discovers this, they still have a desire to hold on to the spiritual, metaphysical world, and so I think that's why we see a lot of ex-Mormons become Christians now, or become ex-Mormon Christians, or get involved with another Christian denomination. The problem I see with this, and perhaps some of you can help me understand this. I'm sure there are some ex-Mormons who have left the Church just cause. They just didn't like it or whatever and left the Church. There may be some people that left the Church because they were being made fun of or whatever. However, I believe that this percentage of ex-Mormons is probably at a minimum. I'm probably going to guess between 3 and 8%, 3 to 7, 8%. Whereas the majority of ex-Mormons have done a fair amount of study after hearing something that concerned them. So they would hear something, and it would kind of trouble them. They would look into it and realize that it's, wow, they were telling the truth. Hey, let's look into this even more. And then to realize even further that the Church actually acknowledges that specific topic, or that specific happening, or historical event, or whatnot. And so that's even more troubling. And then they look into it even more, and they see that the official Church stance on that particular event or idea turns out to be fairly weak in comparison to the objective review of that event or topic or whatever. This is where it gets me, because I know that at that point somebody looks even more into this, as I have, as many of my friends have. You start with, with me it was, I think it was probably a mix between the Book of Abraham and the 4 separate first vision reports. So, you know, I wondered about it and whatever, and I began to look into it, and I began to realize that, wow, the apologist explanation for why the Book of Abraham is completely not in any way associated with the actual papyri that Joseph Smith owned is convincing. That's troubling. And so I would either consider, you know, well, maybe I need to look into this a little bit more. So I dig deeper, and then I find the Kinderhook plates, and I look into that, and I look at the church's official explanation for that, and then I look at the objective, you know, rationalist view of what they think actually happened in that case, and then I go, okay, well, let's look at this more, and eventually you end up looking at several facets of church history and actually become fairly knowledgeable about this topic. Now, one of the things that everybody considers at some point is, well, what about the warm fuzzy feeling? What about the Spirit testifying to me of the truth of this church? And that's a fairly good argument. You know, that's something that everybody gets caught up on for a second, and that's a good, you know, there's good reason for that. The church teaches that the burning in the bosom is more or less the Spirit of God testifying to you that what you're experiencing is truth. And that's how the Spirit testifies truth to the soul, is with that warm fuzzy feeling or any other variation of, or really any other mystical experience. And however, as they begin to contemplate this, they realize, well, then if that's true, then I felt the Spirit watching cartoons, I felt the Spirit riding my bike, I felt the Spirit in many situations talking about topics that aren't even religious. I felt the Spirit, you know, really reading the newspaper. So it comes to this point where they realize that the burning in the bosom isn't exactly what it is portrayed as. And this leads to a very general realization that spiritual experience isn't exactly any sort of indication of truth. In fact, I'm heavy on this. This is one of my favorite things to experiment and really work with, is the spiritual experience, or the mystical experience, I should say, because I cannot qualify the mystical experience as a legitimate spiritual experience. It may just be a psychological, mental experience. However, my point is that we get to a point where we realize that everybody in every denomination has just as solid of an anchor and belief in their specific belief set due to a very intense spiritual personal experience or mystical experience. So then you begin to wonder, okay, let's think about this. You realize that near-death experiences begin to have a very big impact on how you view the mystical experience. You realize that, you know, Buddhists often perceive the Buddha, you know, in glorious light with beams coming out from behind him. Christians often see Jesus the Christ, or are giving tour of heaven and hell. Hindus, as I've said so many times before, will often experience the eternal dance of Kali and Shiva, and interestingly enough, I like to bring this up because this is fascinating. The atheist will often have, in near-death experiences, will experience either an alien abduction, which I found quite telling, really interesting. It kind of, pries open the nature of the human psyche. Or they'll experience meeting past loved ones, people that have died that they've had in their life. So we see here that the mystical experience is not in any way any sort of indication of truth. And if there is a spiritual reality overlaying, underlaying, or somehow interwoven with the physical world, or in some cases, there's the talk that everything is spiritual, and this is just a condensed, slower vibration of energy, which appears to be matter, but really is not. And that's interesting. However, if there is a spiritual nature, the fact of the matter is, taking into consideration the various, plethora of different, really different experiences in mystical experiences, tells us that if there is a spiritual world, that it is either, if these are legitimate spiritual experiences, that it is either easily manipulated by one's subconscious mind or core ideas and beliefs. Basically, that's it, really. So, okay, not that too many people have gone that far with it, but most people come to the realization that the burning in the bosom is not necessarily an indication of truth. It's not really the Spirit of God telling you that something is right, something's wrong, you should do this, you shouldn't do this. And so that's a problem for me when I'm looking at ex-Mormons who would take this trek and look at all this evidence and question it and do their research and really look into this and get to the point where they question the spiritual experience and what the meaning of that is. And they pull themselves from the church. They get excommunicated or request their names removed or whatever, and they embed themselves into a Christian, a separate Christian denomination. Well, why? Why? If you're certain that the mystical experience is not indicative of truth, then what has led you to do that? Because if you take the amount of information, say, that tells us that the church has many flaws and there are many not so true things being told in the church, and there's a lot of flawed history and there's a lot of contradiction, and a logical mindset will look at this information and say, I don't think that church is everything it says it is. I'm not sure if it's true. In fact, there's a lot of evidence telling me that the church is not true, and that I should probably leave it. And then, but they go ahead and blindly embed themselves into Christian belief. And I'm not sure why that happens. So I'm really actually kind of just doing this to get an understanding of, if anybody could, give me your experience or tell me why you've done this, because the fact of the matter is that the amount of damning evidence against the LDS Church is just as much, if not less than, the amount of damning evidence against Christianity in general. In fact, there's a massive movement that thinks that Jesus Christ wasn't even a real person, that he was actually a fabricated individual designed during the Council of Nicaea And that's actually a fairly well substantiated and you know, it's got a lot of foundation. It's not just something people are throwing out there. There's a lot of archaeological evidence pointing to the idea that Jesus Christ may have been a real person, but the stories and all of that stuff behind him are fabricated. In fact, the four Gospels, the later end of in the New Testament, weren't even written until, what was it, 40, 50 years post the time of Christ's crucifixion, which tells us that it's high likely that many of the apostles weren't even alive when the four Gospels were written. There's actually, well, I mean, this is a whole another topic, but there's a ridiculous amount of evidence against Christianity in general. And so here you have these two, ideologies. You have the Mormon religion that somebody has been immersed in, and you have Christianity in general, or whatever denomination they decide to involve themselves in. Both sides have just as much damning evidence against the possibility of that idea being true. And now we're sitting in the middle with the knowledge that the mystical experience is in no way indicative of or telling of what truth is. So why, and this is where I'm troubled, slightly confused as to how this actually happens. Why would somebody who has done his research and concluded that to him that the LDS Church is not true, and uses that as means or a reason to leave, also realizing that the burning in the bosom or the mystical experience isn't necessarily, telling of truth, because he just realized that everything that he felt in that church was not true. And he compares it to his other experiences and other people's mystical experiences, and then for some reason he puts the blinders on at this point and just jumps into a general Christian religion. I'm sure he did his research as to what religion most identifies with his core beliefs, but still, it's interesting that he took all the time to research this evidence and to realize all this stuff and to have this epiphany of the mystical experience, and then completely ignore that's what do you want to call it, like that pattern of realization as he dives right into Christianity. So that's, I suspect it may have to do with the pre-embedded affinity towards Jesus Christ being raised in the LDS Church, and it is something to kind of hold on to, one last little string to kind of hang on to. But other than that, I see no reason why somebody who has just completely torn apart his church of birth, logically, historically, and spiritually, and decides not to apply that to his next spiritual endeavor. So, yeah, if any of you have any comments you would like to share with me, or anything that would help me understand that process, I would be grateful, because it's actually really confusing to me. I'm an ex-Mormon myself. I've concluded that all religion is ridiculous, and that if there is a truth, if there is a God, it is something that happens inside a person through mystical experience, but mystical experience that has been trained for years and honed and controlled to the point where, if there is a spiritual reality, it can be repeatably, experimentally verified. I believe that's not my belief. That's my thoughts on the matter, really. So, thanks for watching. I look forward to actually hearing what others have to say on this topic because it's kind of interesting to me. Okay. All right. See you guys later.